Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "Why did I say all that?" Have you ever over-explained to someone who did not deserve the details? Have you ever tried to prove your point and felt smaller afterward? You may not realize it, but the more you talk, the more you hand over. The fastest way to lose power is to keep talking. Every explanation you give, every argument you win, every extra word you add, quietly teaches people you can be pulled, pressured, and read. The loudest person in the room usually isn't the strongest. They're the most controllable. And here's the part nobody tells you. Silence isn't one thing. It has levels. There's a kind of silence that is weakness, and a kind of silence that turns you into something untouchable. Most people hit the wrong level and think they're just quiet. They're not. They're leaking. In this video, I'm going to show you the 7 levels, how silence evolves from awkward emptiness into real power, so you can stop performing, stop defending, and start controlling the room without saying a word. Level 1. Silent by circumstance. This is the kind of silence you don't choose. It's handed to you early, by personality, by environment, by being the quiet child in a loud room, or the thoughtful adult in a culture that rewards noise. At this level, silence is not power yet. It's raw material. Some people grow up speaking less because no one listened when they tried. Others become quiet because they learned early that talking brought punishment, ridicule, or invisibility. Introversion, shyness, cultural restraint, strict households, all of these can create silence without intention. And this distinction matters. Silence is not the same as suppression. Suppression is silence filled with fear. Silence on its own is empty, neutral, untouched. A quiet child watching instead of speaking isn't weak. They're untrained. An overlooked adult who keeps to themselves isn't powerless. They're undeveloped. At this stage, silence has no leverage. It does not influence others. It does not command space. People may ignore it, talk over it, mistake it for insecurity or lack of thought. Not because silence is weak, but because it hasn't been shaped yet. This is where most people misunderstand quietness. Society labels it as a flaw, something to fix. But nothing is broken here. This level is simply unrefined silence. Think of it like uncut stone, worthless to those who don't know what it can become. Dangerous only when left untouched forever. Level 1 is not strength, but it's not weakness either. It's potential without direction. And that makes it the foundation for everything that comes next. Level 2, observational silence. At this level, silence is no longer accidental. It becomes selective. The person doesn't talk less because they're afraid. They talk less because they're watching. They've realized something, subtle but important. Every conversation reveals more than it intends to. Tone, timing, body language, who interrupts whom, who seeks approval, who avoids eye contact. Patterns start to emerge the moment you stop filling the air with your own voice. Silence here functions like a lens. Listening becomes data collection. While others speak to think, the watcher thinks before speaking. Loud people often talk themselves into confusion, narrating half-formed ideas out loud, exposing their insecurities without realizing it. The observer does the opposite. They absorb first. They map the room. They notice hierarchies that aren't written down. Who leads, who follows, who pretends. This is the first moment silence begins to create an advantage. When you stop rushing to respond, you gain time. When you stop competing for airtime, you gain perspective. You start to see how often people talk, not to communicate, but to assert existence, to fill discomfort, to prove relevance. And that's where the shift happens. Power begins when speech becomes optional, not automatic. When you realize you don't need to comment on everything to stay relevant. When your silence makes others speak more, revealing far more than you ever could. At this stage, silence doesn't dominate the room, but it starts to understand it. And understanding always comes before control. Level 3, emotional silence. This is where silence stops being about observation and starts becoming about control. At this level, the person realizes something most people never do. Emotions leak through words. Tone changes, explanations stretch. Defensiveness shows up as over-talking. Anger disguises itself as just being honest. The moment emotion takes the microphone, power quietly leaves the room. So they don't suppress emotion, they contain it. That distinction is critical. Suppression buries feeling and lets it rot. Emotional silence does the opposite. It acknowledges the feeling internally, but refuses to let it dictate behavior externally. The person feels just as much as before, sometimes more, but they stop broadcasting it. This creates a psychological edge. When your reactions become unpredictable, you become difficult to manipulate. People can no longer pull obvious levers. They don't know which buttons work because you're not advertising where they are. The usual tactics, provocation, guilt, urgency, emotional bait, begin to fail. Silence removes leverage. Manipulators rely on emotional transparency. They need you to explain yourself, defend your feelings, react on cue. When you don't, their power collapses. The conversation slows. The dynamic shifts. Suddenly, they are the ones revealing tension. This level also marks maturity. The person stops mistaking emotional release for honesty. They understand that not every feeling deserves a voice, and not every reaction deserves an audience. Silence becomes a filter, not a wall. At level 3, silence doesn't intimidate yet, but it stabilizes. And stability is the quiet foundation of real power. Level 4, strategic silence. This is the point where silence stops being personal and starts becoming tactical. The person now understands a simple rule. The less available something is, the more valuable it becomes. Words are no different. When you speak constantly, your voice blends into the noise. When you speak rarely, people lean in. Silence here is intentional. Every word is chosen. None are wasted. In negotiations, this silence creates pressure. Most people rush to fill gaps, afraid of awkward pauses. The strategic silent person doesn't. They let the other side talk themselves into concessions. The more the room waits for a response, the more weight that response gains. In conflict, silence disrupts momentum. Instead of reacting, the person pauses. That pause is unsettling. It denies emotional escalation and forces the other person to confront their own intensity. Anger loses oxygen when it isn't met with resistance. In leadership, silence signals authority. Leaders who speak less aren't ignored, they're watched. Their words don't compete for attention, they command it. When they finally speak, it reframes the conversation instead of extending it. The most powerful aspect of this level is what silence forces others to do. They fill the void. They explain too much. They justify themselves. They reveal intentions, insecurities, hidden agendas. The silence becomes a psychological vacuum, pulling truth into the open without effort. And this is where something new appears. Fear. Not fear of aggression, fear of unpredictability. People begin to sense that you are not easily moved, not easily read, not easily pushed. Silence stops feeling passive to them. It starts feeling deliberate. At level 4, silence doesn't ask for control. It quietly takes it. Level 5, psychological silence. At this level, silence moves inward. It's no longer just about what you say or don't say. It's about what no longer pulls you. The quiet person stops needing validation, approval, or recognition to feel grounded. Their silence becomes internal as well as external. This is where the ego begins to withdraw. Most people speak to confirm their identity. They explain themselves to feel understood. They defend their choices to feel justified. But the psychologically silent person no longer feels that pressure. They don't need to narrate their thinking, announce their values, or prove their intelligence. Not because they're superior, but because they're aligned. Silence here isn't avoidance, it's clarity. When your inner world is settled, you don't rush to correct misunderstandings or chase agreement. You understand that being misunderstood is not a threat. It's often the cost of independence. This creates freedom from social noise. Opinions lose their grip, trends lose their urgency. Criticism becomes information, not the identity. Praise becomes pleasant, not addictive. The mind stops bouncing between approval and rejection and settles into something quieter and far more stable. At this stage, silence becomes a form of self-trust. There's no compulsion to justify, explain, or defend, because nothing inside feels on trial. The person knows who they are without external confirmation. Their thoughts no longer fight for airtime. They simply exist. This is inner alignment, and once the mind becomes quiet, the world loses its ability to disturb it. Level 6. Social silence. At this level, something subtle but unmistakable happens. People begin to adjust around you. You don't announce yourself. You don't compete for attention. Yet conversations slow when you enter. Eye contact lingers. Decisions hesitate until your reaction is sensed. Your silence starts to carry weight that words no longer need to explain. This is social gravity. Human beings are pattern-seeking. When someone speaks less but seems unmoved, unreactive, and self-contained, the mind fills in the gaps. Competence gets projected onto silence. Confidence gets assumed. Authority is inferred without being claimed. Silence becomes a status signal. While others perform confidence, louder opinions, faster responses, stronger reactions, the socially silent person does none of it. And that contrast is unsettling. Performative confidence needs constant reinforcement. Silent authority does not. Groups instinctively look to the quiet person during moments of uncertainty. Not because they demanded leadership, but because their calm suggests perspective. Their lack of urgency suggests control. Their restraint suggests depth. This is where silence starts to intimidate, not through threat but through absence. People don't know where they stand with you. They can't predict approval or rejection. And unpredictability at this level creates respect, and sometimes discomfort. The quiet person now influences the room. Without directing it, they shape behavior without issuing commands. At level 6, silence no longer belongs to you alone. It begins to reorganize the social environment around you. Level 7. Existential silence. At this final level, silence is no longer something you use. It's something you are. There is no strategy left, no technique, no adjustment. The person is no longer reacting to the noise of the world, because the noise no longer reaches them. Praise doesn't inflate them. Insults don't provoke them. Urgency doesn't rush them. Chaos doesn't pull them out of center. This is existential silence. It's a deep detachment from noise-driven systems. Status games, outrage cycles, approval economies, constant explanation. The person no longer lives in reaction to signals. They move on their own internal clock. Silence here feels heavy to others. Not because it's intimidating by design, but because it cannot be accessed. There's nothing to negotiate with. Nothing to flatter, nothing to threaten. When someone needs nothing, leverage disappears. This is silence as freedom. The world loses its grip when it can no longer provoke response. Arguments dissolve because there's no one to argue with. Manipulation fails because there's nothing to take. Pressure evaporates because urgency finds no entry point. This level cannot be threatened because it requires nothing to survive. Power here is invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't prove itself. It doesn't compete. It simply remains unmoved, unbothered, and unreachable. And that is the rarest form of power there is. When you step back and look at all 7 levels together, a pattern becomes clear. Loudness creates moments. Silence creates outcomes. Noise feels powerful because it's immediate. It demands attention, reactions, validation. But it burns fast. The louder the display, the more energy it requires to sustain. Eventually, it collapses under its own need to be seen. Silence works differently. It compounds. Each level builds on the last, from unchosen quiet to observation to emotional control to strategy to inner alignment to social gravity and finally to existential independence. Nothing is forced, nothing is rushed. Power accumulates quietly, almost invisibly. This is why the modern world misunderstands silence. We live in an economy of noise, constant commentary, instant reactions, public opinions, endless explanations. In that environment, silence looks like absence, like disengagement, like weakness. It isn't. Silence is the refusal to play short-term games. It's patience in a culture addicted to immediacy. It's restraint in a system built on exposure. And over time, that restraint becomes dominance. Quiet people don't need to control every conversation. They don't need to win every argument. They don't need to prove anything in the moment. They let time do the work. And in the long run, silence doesn't just protect power. It reveals who truly has it. That's the part most people never realize.